Get the owner out here! Right now!" Celine Hart's scream tore through the luxurious ambiance of the clock tower room like a knife. All the clinking of silverware stopped mid-air. All the unfinished conversations abruptly went silent. I sat there, at my familiar corner table, the hot cup of tea still gently steaming between my trembling hands. 66 years old, an old gray cardigan, flat shoes with worn heels, gray hair neatly tied back, and in front of me, my daughter-in-law, Celine, standing in the middle of the restaurant, arrogant in her blood-red dress worth several $1,000s. The sparkle of diamonds on her wrist reflected under the crystal chandelier above. She pointed straight at me, as if I were a stain to be wiped from her perfect canvas. "What is this old woman doing here? Look at the way she's dressed. This is a high-end restaurant, not a charity shelter. Get her out of here, now!" The entire restaurant was stunned. I could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on me, some curious, some pitying, but most were contemptuous. And then Corin, my son, stepped forward. His face was flushed, not with anger, but with embarrassment. Embarrassment because of me. "Mom," he ground out the word, "what are you doing here?" "Look at you. It's utterly humiliating." Humiliating. Just 2 words, but they were like a blade twisting directly into my heart. My son, the child I once held in my arms, who I used to lull to sleep through rainy nights, stood there, viewing his mother as a source of shame. Celine turned and called out loudly, "I need to see the manager." "Right now. This woman does not belong here. We pay for a sophisticated atmosphere, and this shows up. Where is the owner? I want to speak to the owner." The owner. She wants to meet the owner. If only she knew. If only both of them knew. The office door opened. Anton Caruso, Tony, my manager for 12 years, walked out. He maintained the composure of an experienced man. His gaze swept over me, a flash of concern, then turned to Celine. "How may I assist you, madam?" Celine tilted her chin, her voice acerbic. "Finally, someone in charge." "That woman must leave immediately. Look at her. She is negatively impacting everyone's experience." Corin stood next to his wife, nodding in agreement. My son, my flesh and blood, the child I had sworn to protect until my last breath, now standing there, wanting me to disappear. Tony looked at me, his eyes silently asking, "What do you want me to do?" I simply placed the teacup down gently. My palms were cold. My heartbeat felt heavy as stone. Perhaps the time has come, the time for them to know the truth, the time for my son to understand that this woman who does not belong here is the person who owns the entire place where he is standing. But before I tell you about that fateful moment, let me take you back to where it all began. To the years when a mother's love, slowly, quietly, was eroded by the contempt of her own child. My name is Eudora Glass, and this is the story of the day I taught my son a lesson he will never forget. If you are listening to this story and feel your heart clench a little, please hit subscribe so you don't miss out on stories that are this real, deep, and touching. And let me ask you, if you were in my position, would you get up and leave in silence, or stay to let them know the truth? Providence, Rhode Island, 1983. 42 years before the day my own son treated me like trash in the clock tower room, my life was so bright. I was 24. Rupert, the man I loved at first sight, was 26. We had been married for 6 months, a small wedding in the church near the harbor with only 12 people in attendance. No designer wedding dress, no extravagant reception. Only love, pure, simple. To the point where it was almost sacred. Rupert cooked, and I did the calculations. He had the hands that knew how to season happiness into a dish. I, on the other hand, knew how to turn every penny into a small brick for our dream. We rented a tiny space in the Federal Hill area, only 22 seats. The kitchen was so small that if two people turned their backs, they would bump into each other. The walls were peeling. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The sign outside was hand-painted by Rupert, "Granite and Tide." "Enduring as granite, flexible as the tide," he said. I remember the opening night down to every breath. It was October and the wind was biting. We prepared food for 50 guests. Only 3 people came. 3 people. I stood at the register, forcing a smile while my throat choked up. Rupert cooked on, without complaint, without blame. He cooked as if he were serving a full house. When the last customer, Mr. Giuseppe, an elderly Italian immigrant, left, he stopped at the door, turning back to say in a trembling yet warm voice, "Your risotto is the best I have eaten since leaving Milano. I will be back, and I will bring my friends." We stood watching him disappear into the cold night. Rupert took my hand. Mine was freezing cold. "Eudora, don't you see? Just one more person every day. One more person who loves our food. One more person who tells others, we will make it." He kissed my forehead, and I believed him with every fiber of my being. Rupert was right. The next week, Mr. Giuseppe did come back, bringing 4 friends. They ate, they told others. A local food critic happened to drop by, writing a short piece in the Providence Journal, a rough gem on Federal Hill that needs polishing. The osso buco at Granite and Tide is worth crowding in for 6 months later. We had to hire more staff. A year later, the restaurant was fully booked every night, and 2 years after opening, Corin, our son, was born. I gave birth in a public hospital. No private room, just a thin curtain separating us. Rupert held my hand for 14 hours. When Corin was born, crying loudly amidst the cold air of the delivery room, Rupert cried too. "We will give him everything we never had," he whispered. "Education, opportunities, a future." We named him Corin, meaning center, because he was the center of this small universe. The following years were a dizzying blur of sleep deprivation, diapers, and work. I carried my son in a sling on my chest, simultaneously managing the register and greeting guests. Rupert held the baby in the kitchen whenever I went out to serve. Corin grew up surrounded by the smell of basil, garlic, simmering tomatoes, and the rhythmic sound of knives chopping on the wooden board. He took his first steps right in the middle of the restaurant, from one table to the next, to the applause of the customers. His first word was "Papa," pointing to Rupert, his father cooking in the small kitchen. Every night, after closing time, Corin sat doing his homework on the clean dining table. The soft yellow light shone down on his notebook, the sound of the pencil scratching on paper. I sat next to him, helping him read, helping him write. "Mom, are you tired?" Corin asked when he was only 6. "No, my love. I'm never tired when I'm with you." A gentle lie. The truth was, I was exhausted. Only sleeping 4 hours a night, but when I saw my son, all weariness vanished. Corin grew up, and Granite and Tide grew too. We opened the second restaurant when he was 8, the third when he was 11. Rupert no longer had to cook every night. He trained new chefs. I moved from the register to the negotiating table, managing finances, choosing locations. We still lived simply, the small house on Federal Hill, the 1989 Honda Civic, clothes bought from thrift stores. No one knew we were gradually becoming quite wealthy. All the money poured into the business, into the future, into Corin. But we didn't realize our son was learning a different lesson. If you ever believe that honest love and labor are enough to raise a good child, then stop for a second. Because sometimes the very things we think are best plant the seeds for future tragedy. Corin began to change around the age of 12, 13. His friends at the private school, the one we stretched ourselves to the limit to send him to, were not children of laborers. They were the children of doctors, lawyers, businessmen. One day I came to pick him up after school. I saw him standing alone in the corner of the playground. A group of friends stood far away, laughing and talking. No one invited him to join. "Corin, Why aren't you playing with your friends?" "They asked what my parents did." "I said my parents own a restaurant." "They laughed, Mom. They called me a restaurant kid, as if that were something to be ashamed of." My heart tightened. "My darling, honest work is never something to be ashamed of. Your father and I built—" "You don't understand," Corin interrupted, his voice cold. "You don't understand what it's like to be laughed at because your parents are service people." Service people. Those two words dropped into my heart like a stone falling into a deep well. Rupert and I tried to explain, talked about self-respect, the value of labor, and pride. But Corin was no longer listening. During the high school years, the gap between us grew like a slow crack in a wall. Corin stopped inviting friends home. The house is too small, too old. He didn't want us to attend parent-teacher meetings. Mom and Dad don't look appropriate. Once, when he was 16, I walked past his room and heard his voice on the phone. "Yeah, we're going to the party." "No, my parents are busy. They're in the F&B industry. Like management. Not owners. Rupert and I were indeed the owners of 4 restaurants. Yet my son was so ashamed he had to lie. I didn't walk in. I stood outside in the hallway, leaning against the wall. And for the first time in years, I asked myself, what did we do wrong? We gave him everything. The best education, opportunities, clothes, a future. But did we accidentally teach him that a person's worth lies in their appearance? Rupert found me crying silently. He held me. He didn't say anything, but I knew he had heard everything too. "Don't worry, Eudora," he whispered. "He's young. He will understand later. When he grows up, he will understand I wanted to believe it. I tried to believe it. But deep inside, a small fear began to rise. What if he never understands? What if my son has gone too far, and I have no way to bring him back? I didn't know that. The worst was yet to come. 3 years later, Rupert, the man I loved more than my own life, would leave me. Forever. And when he was gone, Corin would show me his true self. A self that I no longer recognized. February 2020. The year I lost everything. Not due to a pandemic or a crisis, but to a heart attack that struck like lightning. Rupert was 62, outwardly healthy, jogging along the Providence River at 5 a.m., trying new dishes in the kitchen at night. At the time, Granite and Tide Hospitality had 7 restaurants. The Clock Tower Room on Westminster Street was mentioned in major newspapers. We should have been at peace. But in those final months, I always sensed a quiet sadness in him. One night we sat in the living room, the TV on, but neither of us watching. "Corin," Rupert said. Just one word, but it weighed like the whole world. I think I failed with him. Gave him everything, except the most important thing, human decency. He sighed softly. He still has a heart. It's just buried under layers of superficiality. I held his hand. We still have time. We'll find our way back to him. Rupert gave a sad smile. You are more optimistic than I am, Dora. That was the last time we spoke about Corin. 3 days later, Rupert collapsed right in the kitchen of the Clock Tower Room. At the hospital, the doctor spoke in technical terms. I only heard one sentence. My husband is gone. I held his hand. It was already cold. You promised we would grow old together. My voice choked. I called Corin from the hospital. Your father is gone. A pause, then a flat voice. Which hospital are you at? I'm in Newport. Let me see about arrangements. He didn't come that evening. He arrived the next morning. The funeral was at the small parlor on Federal Hill, 3 blocks from our first restaurant. Nearly 300 people came, staff, regular customers, colleagues. Mr. Giuseppe, our very first customer, stood with his cane, placing a white rose on the casket. He gave me a piece of home in every dish. I nodded, tears falling for a kind love. Corin and Celine arrived late. sitting in the back row. After the ceremony, I heard Celine on the phone, her voice deliberately loud. "Yeah, it's my father-in-law's funeral. Small thing. I can be home early tonight. Such a hassle." The word hassle cut deep into my chest. They stopped by my house. Celine glanced at the walls, at the rug. "This house needs so much renovation." Corin sat opposite me, his voice cold. "Mom, let's be practical. Finances. The house. What did Dad leave behind? How will you live?" I replied, "I'm fine. Your father and I have some savings." "How much?" he asked directly. The watch on his wrist glittered. I looked at my 37-year-old son and understood. If I told them the truth now, they would only see money. I chose to remain silent. They stood up. "Call if you need anything." "We're busy." No hug. The door closed, and the house felt empty. For the first time since Rupert passed, I didn't cry. I sat still, my heart turning numb, realizing I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost my son long ago, but hadn't dared to admit it. What would you do when the only family member you have left only sees you as a number? Stay silent to cling to a little affection? Or tell the truth and accept the loneliness? My answer had to wait until that fateful night at the clock tower room. 2 years later, Corin and Celine clearly showed me who they were. I, foolish and fragile, still gave chances, still hoped, still tried to convince myself that love would eventually win. Until one night, under the chandelier lights and the clinking of cutlery, I stood up and told myself, "Stop. Enough." In the months following Rupert's death, I felt like a ship adrift. Every morning my hand still instinctively reached across the bed, only to touch the cold sheet. 7 restaurants couldn't run themselves, so I kept working. But every decision suddenly weighed 1,000 times heavier. Before, Rupert set the direction, and I executed. Now, everything fell on my shoulders. Tony saw that I was sinking. One afternoon, he brought a cup of tea into my office. "Mrs. Glass, you need a break. You are carrying too much. If not me, then who, Tony? Who will keep what Rupert and I built?" He hesitated. "There's Corin." I let out a bitter laugh. "My son is ashamed of these restaurants." 3 weeks after the funeral, Corin called. "Mom, I need a little help. The condo management fee is $3,000. I'll pay you back next month." The first time my son called, it was to ask for money. I asked softly, "Can you come visit me? Not for the money, just to talk?" "Yeah, some week. But right now, the money." I transferred the money. He didn't come that week, nor the next, and it stayed that way for the next 2 months. In June, Brenda called with news. Celine was pregnant. I was going to have a grandson, a remaining piece of Rupert. I called, "Son, I'm so happy." Corin replied indifferently, "Yes, thanks, Mom." We've bought all the gear, all high-end organic brands. Celine is very meticulous. What I wanted to make with my own loving hands wasn't up to standard. I asked to be present at the birth. Corin hedged. "We'll see. Celine wants privacy, only close family." On the day, a text arrived. "Eames Glass born. 3.2 kilograms. Everyone's healthy. I rushed to Women and Infants Hospital." Celine opened the door, her face pale. "Eudora? What are you doing here?" "I am the grandmother." "I want to meet my grandson." She blocked the way, saying she'd let me in for a moment because her parents are inside. They walked out shortly after, looking at me like a servant. "The baby looks just like our side of the family," Mrs. Vivian Hart said with false sweetness. I held Eames for 15 minutes, all I was allowed. The baby yawned, his hand small as a thumbnail. I saw Rupert in his chin, his lips. "You look like your grandpa," I whispered. Corin only looked at his watch. Celine gently ushered me out. "I'm tired. Mom should go home." In the following months, I tried to wedge myself into my grandson's life, calling, texting, buying gifts. The reasons for refusal were always ready. Eames is sleeping/sick/having a family photo shoot. I knitted the baby a navy blue wool scarf with a tide wave pattern, the tide of granite and tide. Celine accepted it and then asked for the organic certification. 2 months later, I found the scarf in a bag of charity donations. His first birthday, I found out about it via Instagram, a small party with 50 guests, a clown, and a jungle backdrop. I wasn't in any of the photos. I wish I could have been there, I texted. 3 hours later, Corin replied, "It was a small party. Just close family." That night, Brenda found me sitting on the kitchen floor, clutching my wedding photo. "Eudora, you are letting them take your dignity piece by piece. You have to stop. You have to protect yourself." But how can a mother defend herself against her own son? I continued calling without a reply, sending gifts without thanks, hoping against change. One Sunday afternoon, Corin and Celine showed up unexpectedly. Eames, 18 months old, looked at me like a stranger. "We're worried about you, Mom," Corin began. Celine continued, "You're getting old, living alone. You should look for a nursing home, with professionals, people your own age." I was 64, still healthy, still working. The phrase "getting old" sounded like a blunt knife. "I'm fine right now," I said. "Right now, yes," Corin emphasized. "We can't carry you. Besides, you don't want to be a burden, do you?" I choked up. Celine softened her tone. "You should also settle your will soon to avoid complications for everyone." They talked about my death like an appointment. Corin looked around. "This area's property values have gone up. Sell the house, you'll have money for a good facility. The rest, we are your only family." I asked, "Are you planning my death?" Celine forced a smile. "Just being practical, Mom." They left. The house, where Rupert and I raised Corin, suddenly felt foreign. I called Lyle Voss, my lawyer. "Lyle, I need to change my will. Right now." From that moment on, I quietly began a plan. Not even Brenda knew, because I had understood. My son doesn't love me. He's just waiting for the inheritance. And it was time I taught him a lesson. If it were you, would you continue to stay silent, to cling to a little bit of family? Or would you flip the card, accept the solitude, but keep your dignity? I chose the latter path. And for the fall to be deep enough, I needed a public night out, in front of the people Corin and Celine wanted to impress the most. Before the lesson began, there was one final insult. A night at the clock tower room. The night everything changed forever. December, the year after Rupert's death. I received a call from Corin. It was so rare that my heart briefly lit up with a naive hope. "Mom, this Christmas we want to host a family dinner at our place. Please come, please come." 3 simple words that felt like light at the end of a tunnel to me. "Yes, my son. I'll come. Can I bring anything?" "No need, Mom. We have everything covered. Just come. I spent 3 full weeks preparing. I bought a new green sweater. Not expensive, a Macy's sale item, but the color was nice and it was new. I wanted to look good enough not to embarrass my son. I baked cinnamon gingerbread cookies using my mother's recipe. The aroma filled the house, just like the old days when Corin was small and ran into the kitchen, his eyes bright. "Mom!" That Christmas cookie smell. I also wrapped a gift for Eames, a set of picture books about the ocean and a small wooden boat bought from a local artisan. Simple, handmade, made with love. On Christmas Day, I drove to their condo downtown, a luxury building, security guards present, marble lobby and crystal chandeliers, a world completely different from Federal Hill. I rang the doorbell. Corin opened the door. "Oh, Mom, you're here." "Come in." No hug, no kiss hello. Just a simple, "Come in," as if opening the door for a plumber. I stepped inside. The apartment was lavishly decorated for Christmas. A floor-to-ceiling tree, sparkling LED lights, expensive scented candles, all picture perfect like a magazine. And in the living room, many people. I froze. This was not the family dinner Corin had mentioned. "Ah, Mom!" Celine appeared in a gorgeous red dress, her jewelry gleaming. "Everyone, this is my mother-in-law, Eudora." The introduction was cold. Not Corin's mother, not Eames's grandmother, just mother-in-law. I looked around. There were Harlan and Vivian Hart, Celine's parents, Aurora, Celine's sister, with her husband, and a few other couples who were friends. Everyone was elegant. Suits, evening gowns, gemstones. And me. Macy's green sweater, simple pants, flat shoes. I was like a smudge on the perfect picture. "I brought homemade cookies, a traditional family recipe," I smiled, presenting the box. Celine looked at the box as if it had just fallen off a garbage truck. "Oh, adorable." "Just leave it there, Mom. We already have dessert. I ordered from Pastiche, that famous French place, you know." The cookie box was placed on a side table, far from the main area. Vivian Hart approached, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Eudora, are you well? You look tired." "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. I heard you've been living alone since Mr. Glass passed. So sad. I can't imagine. Growing old alone." Celine invited everyone to the table. Long, set for 12, the food elaborately arranged, modern-style turkey, organic vegetables, expensive wine. Everyone quickly found their seats. As for me, no one showed me where to sit. "Mom, sit, at the end of the table." Celine waved her hand. "The furthest spot, next to the kitchen door." I sat down next to an empty chair while the other groups chatted animatedly. The meal began. Vivian prompted a conversation about Tuscany travel so Harlan could talk about their private villa, rare wine, and 3 Michelin-star restaurants. Everyone expressed admiration. Aurora turned to me. "What about you? Where do you travel?" All eyes turned to me. "Ah, I mainly work. I don't travel far." "What do you do?" Her tone was not so much curious as waiting for a prompt for mockery. "I work in the restaurant industry." Celine immediately interjected, "Corin's late father and mother used to have a small restaurant." The food was comfort food. Very cute. A small restaurant. Comfort food, cute. We had 7 restaurants. The clock tower room had been nationally reviewed. The revenue was 8 figures. I remained silent, letting them think I was poor, letting them feel superior. I was observing, noticing every look of disdain. Harlan chuckled. "Restaurants, huh?" Hard work, low margins. With ingredient prices rising now, I guess. "It closed down, right?" "It closed down," Celine replied crisply, a smooth lie. Corin did not correct her. He only focused on carving the turkey, avoiding my gaze. Dinner dragged on like an hour in the desert. No one asked how I was living, if I was lonely, or if I missed Rupert. They talked about travel, new cars, private schools for Eames, and investments. I sat at the end of the table, invisible. Celine brought out the dessert from Pastiche, and the table erupted in praise. My gingerbread box remained untouched on the side table. No one touched it. Then came the gift opening. Eames sat amidst a mountain of beautiful boxes, expensive toys, designer clothes, a children's iPad. I presented my gift, the picture books, and the small wooden boat. Celine opened it, forcing a smile. "Oh, books." And a wooden boat. So vintage. Vivian nodded approvingly. "Nowadays, things must have safety certifications." Wood is dangerous, prone to splinters. As Eames reached out, Celine quickly pulled the gifts back. "No, my love. This isn't safe." In my grandson's eyes, I saw the spark of curiosity fade. After dinner, they drifted to the living room for drinks, conversation, and photos. I stood on the sidelines. No one invited me to join. I leaned down by Eames. My darling grandson, are you happy? He looked at me, his 2.5-year-old eyes wide. Who are you? 3 words like a knife blade. I am Grandma. I am your daddy's mother. He looked to Corin for confirmation, then back to me. Old lady. And ran off. At 8 o'clock, I excused myself. Son, I'm heading home. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, Mom, drive safely. No, stay a little longer, Mom. No, let me walk you out. I looked back one last time. Corin laughing with his friends, Celine taking a selfie with her family, Eames in his maternal grandparents' arms. No one looked my way. Down the bright glass elevator, out to the marble lobby. The security guard opened the door. Have a good night, ma'am. Thank you. But the night was not good. In the car, I looked up at the brightly lit 20th floor, tears silently streaming down my face. When I got home and opened my bag, they had tucked my cookie box back in with the note, Too many desserts, Mom. Take this home to eat later. The fragrant gingerbread made with love, untouched. 10 o'clock, Brenda called. Eudora, did you get home safely? Sister Brenda. My voice broke. I told her everything. How they introduced me, how they treated me, the ridiculed gift, Eames not recognizing his grandmother. Brenda was silent for a moment, then trembled with anger. That is enough. Enough, Eudora. Family doesn't do that. You are a powerful woman, 7 restaurants, $8 million, respected by your staff, respected by the industry. Why are you letting those 2 ingrates trample your dignity? I sobbed. Because they are my son. Because Eames is my grandson. If they loved you, they wouldn't do that. It's time to teach them a lesson. The next morning, I called Lyle Voss, my lawyer. Lyle, prepare a new will for me. And I want to hire a detective, Nico Petrova, the one you once recommended. I need to know everything about Corin and Celine's lives. Everything. Eudora, are you sure? Once you know, you can't unknow it. I'm sure. I need to know who my son truly is. The investigation began. What I found out was worse than I imagined, and it all led me back to the clock tower room, the night everything shattered, or rather, the night everything was finally put right. Because sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes dignity must be defended, even if it tears a mother's heart apart. If you were there that night, would you grit your teeth and swallow it all to keep a bit of family? Or would you quietly build the final barrier to keep your own dignity? Stay with me, because what the detective found will make that Christmas dinner seem as innocent as a New Year's greeting. Nico Petrova wasn't the kind of detective who steps out of a movie. No trench coat, no cigarette, no cryptic demeanor. She was 50, with salt and pepper short hair, a neat black suit, carrying a laptop, and a gaze that missed no detail. We met at a small cafe on Hope Street, far from the downtown area Corin frequented. Mrs. Glass, are you sure you want to know? Nico opened her machine. When I dig all the way. And sometimes the truth is not what parents want to read. I took a sip of coffee as bitter as my life then. I need to know. My son is becoming a stranger. 3 to 4 weeks, she said. Prepare yourself. 3 weeks later, at Lyle Voss's office, Nico placed a thick file in front of me. Photos, statements, account summaries, printed emails. Your son and daughter-in-law are drowning in debt. I looked at the number. 200,000? 223,000, Nico pointed. 5 maxed-out credit cards. 3 personal loans with exorbitant interest. They only pay the minimum each month. She flipped the page. Condo, rented for $4,200 per month, 3 times past due. Corin's Porsche, $1,100 per month lease. Celine's clothes and bags. Many items were bought, photographed, posted on Instagram, and returned within 30 days. In a photo, Celine wore a Versace dress captioned, "Treating myself diamond." Note, item returned after 2 days. Reason doesn't fit. There's more. Nico lowered her voice. Corin declared an income of $180,000 per year on his loan application. Real income is $72,000. Falsified documents. Lyle looked up. Criminal offense. Nico rotated the screen. Celine's Instagram, hundreds of posts, Eames appearing frequently, captions full of charity claims. Every share helps disabled children. Thank you for supporting orphans. There is no official campaign, Nico stated. Donation money flows into Celine's account via Venmo/PayPal, over $30,000 in 18 months. Lyle frowned. Mail fraud, wire fraud, potentially federal prosecution. I choked. Did Corin know? He knew. Nico placed the printed email chain. From Corin Glass to Celine Hart. This week's money. Be careful with PayPal. Don't withdraw too much at once. Break it up. Delete comments asking for the official organization's name. Keep it vague. Then came the backed-up messages. Celine, your mom almost saw the cookie box I put in the charity bag. The old woman is always snooping, Corin. I'll handle it. She's so weak. All she does is cry and beg to see us. Pitiful Celine. Remember the wooden boat the old woman brought? I threw it away immediately. So ugly, Corin. Good. When she dies, the house is ours. That area's value has increased, at least $300,000. We'll have enough left after paying debts to open the restaurant. The room was silent. I read it a second time, a third time. The words pitiful, when she dies, weighed like a sledgehammer. Nico finished. Their business plan to open a restaurant is fake. Fabricated numbers, exaggerated experience. They are looking to defraud investors. Armand DeWolf is considering $250,000. They have a dinner meeting with Isla Chen and one other person at the Clock Tower Room, 8:30 p.m. next Friday. My restaurant. They plan to use the Clock Tower Room to defraud investors, and still thought I was just a poor old woman who knows nothing. I looked up, my voice strangely calm. When are they meeting DeWolf? Next Friday, Nico replied. I stood up. Lyle and Nico watched me expectantly. Lyle, I said, enunciating every word, draft a new will. Corin will receive the house, the one he's hoping I die to sell, and $10,000 cash. Everything else, 7 restaurants, real estate, investment portfolio, goes into a trust, allocated to loyal employees, to legitimate children's charities, and a scholarship fund for Eames when he turns 25, managed by an independent administrator. Corin and Celine are not to touch it. Lyle scribbled quickly. Understood. Anything else? This Friday, I will sit at the corner table, order tea as usual. Tony will be waiting for the signal to bring out all the ownership papers right in front of them. I called Anton Caruso. Tony, there might be a confrontation that night. When I give the signal, bring out the ownership papers, business registration, everything. A pause. Then Tony's voice was relieved. Finally, you are fighting back. We are ready. For the past 12 years, you have treated us like family. It's time we protect you. I called Brenda. I'm going to do it, sister. This Friday. Do you need me there? No. Just stay by the phone. Pick me up afterward. I'll be here. You are never alone, Eudora. The night came slowly. A part of me, the mother, wanted to call Corin and ask, is there any other explanation? But the other part, which had been trampled too much, knew. There was no excuse left. If it were you, confront them immediately or stay silent to keep the peace. Hit. Subscribe to join me this Friday night, where one sentence, I'd like to speak to the owner, will flip the entire game. Friday, I wore my familiar gray cardigan, black pants, and flat shoes. I didn't need to dress up to prove my worth. I arrived at the Clock Tower Room at 7 p.m. Tony ushered me through the back door. The documents are ready. Key personnel have been briefed. We await the signal. I sat at the corner table, ordered a cup of tea. My heart beat fast, my hands trembled slightly, but my mind was crystal clear. 8:25 p.m. The door opened. Corin walked in, next to Celine, followed by Armand DeWolf, Isla Chen, and one more investor. The game began. 8:27 p.m. I saw them before they could see me. Corin led the way. A sleek charcoal gray suit, Hermes tie, perfectly gelled hair, the confident smile of someone who believed he would conquer the world tonight. Celine clung to his arm, a bold turquoise silk dress with a high slit, diamonds glistening under the chandelier. Real or fake, it no longer mattered to me. Behind them were three people. Armand DeWolf, a silver-haired gentleman in his late 50s, a Savile Row suit, a Patek Philippe watch. Isla Chen, an elegant venture capitalist in a tailored black suit, and a younger man, perhaps an assistant. I sat at my familiar corner table, a hot cup of tea in front of me. My heart beat steadily, my hands no longer trembling. A strange tranquility settled over me, the calm before the storm. Tony walked out to greet them, professional, welcoming. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the clock tower room. I have a table set for Mr. Glass." "That's right." Corin shook hands like a boss. "The VIP table. We requested it. Yes, the center table, the best position in the restaurant. Please follow me." They walked through the main hall, past couples having romantic dinners, past family celebration tables. Then they passed my table. Celine saw me first. Her eyes widened, her mouth froze, as if she had just seen a ghost. She gripped Corin's arm. "Corin!" Surprise mixed with fury. "What is it?" Celine pointed directly at me. No name, just pointing. Corin followed her gaze. In that moment, I saw every layer of emotion flash across my son's face. Shock, confusion, then shame and anger. He spoke softly to Celine, then turned to the investors. "Excuse us for a moment, please. A small matter to handle. Tony, please show our guest to the table first. We'll be right there." Armand looked in my direction, curious but politely nodding, following Tony into the center of the restaurant. Corin marched straight up to me. His face was flushed, not with emotion at seeing his mother, but with rage. "What are you doing here, Mom?" I looked straight into his eyes. "I am having dinner, Corin." "Like any other customer. But, you know I have an important appointment tonight." "Did you tell me?" He opened his mouth and then closed it. Silent. Celine cut in, her voice sharp. "Eleanor, are you joking? Look at the way you are dressed. This is the Clock Tower Room, the most high-end restaurant in Providence, not a place for—" She stopped mid-sentence. "A place for people like me." I finished her sentence. "That's what you were going to say, isn't it, Celine?" Nearby tables began to turn, whispers spread. The elderly couple next to me looked at me sympathetically. Some glances from farther away were dismissive toward me. Corin realized they were making a scene. He leaned down, lowering his voice. "Mom, please. This is my last chance. They can change my life. You are ruining everything. Please, just go home." "Ruining? Me sitting here having dinner in a public restaurant is ruining your life?" Celine couldn't control her voice. "Do you know what you look like? Cheap sweater, old shoes, unkempt gray hair. We are trying to make a professional impression, and you show up like a poor person, homeless, someone who doesn't belong here," I continued. "Yes," Celine clapped softly. "Finally, you understand." A few people shook their heads, at Celine, not at me. Corin squeezed his wife's hand. "Stop it. Everyone's watching." Then he turned back, his tone pleading mixed with threat. "Mom, I'm asking for the last time. Go home. I promise I'll call next week. But now, you have to leave." I looked at my 38-year-old son in his expensive suit bought with debt, wearing a watch to fake success, ashamed of his mother who isn't up to standard. while he had no idea that Mother owned everything he was standing on. "No, I am not leaving." Celine lost control. "That's it! Staff! Security! Someone!" Tony appeared immediately. He had been standing ready. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Celine pointed directly at me. "Get this woman out. She is disturbing the restaurant's atmosphere." Tony looked at me, then at Celine, his voice calm. "She is one of our regular guests and has violated no rules." "Rules? Do you have a dress code? Look at her. This is a 5-star restaurant." I thought to myself, the clock tower room isn't 5-star in the way Celine imagines, but never mind. Tony remained composed. "Our dress code is smart casual. She meets it," Corin interjected, trying to be courteous. "Tony, I understand the rules. But this is a special situation. This is my mother. She is elderly, sometimes confused. She shouldn't be here alone." Confused. "My son just told the staff I was suffering from cognitive decline." Tony glanced at me, a flash of anger, but his voice remained level. "To me, she is perfectly lucid, sir." Celine shrieked, "I want to see the owner. Get the owner of this restaurant out here." The entire restaurant paused. Forks stopped. The kitchen staff peered through the pass-through window. Armand DeWolf and Isla Chen left their center table and approached. "Corin, is there an issue?" Armand asked, his voice deep and authoritative. "Nothing, sir. Just a small family misunderstanding." Corin forced a smile. "This is your mother?" Isla looked at me, then back at him. "Yes," he grudgingly admitted. "Yes." "And you are trying to have your mother removed from the restaurant?" Isla raised an eyebrow. Celine chimed in. "You don't understand. She doesn't belong here. We are protecting her from embarrassment." Armand looked at Celine, the look of a man who had seen every type of person in the business world. "Protecting her or protecting yourselves from embarrassment?" Tony spoke. "If you permit, I will contact the highest management to handle this appropriately." "Yes!" Selena almost cheered. "Call the owner out here. I want them to know how their staff is operating, and I want this woman removed." Tony bowed his head. "Yes, please wait a moment." He turned and walked into the office. I wrapped my hands around the teacup, looking at my son, my daughter-in-law, the investors, the whole room holding its breath. My heart pounded, not from fear, but because for the first time after all these years of being trampled, the truth was about to shine, and once the light was on, no one would look at me the same way again. Tony returned, carrying a leather-bound folder. Trailing him were Maria, a 15-year veteran server, Carlos, the sous chef, and Jennifer, the bar manager. They lined up behind him, a silent but steady team. Tony stopped by the center table, not in front of Corin or Celine. "My sincere apologies for the interruption," he said clearly. "Before resolving this, something needs to be made clear." He opened the folder. The Clock Tower room, along with 6 other restaurants in the Granite and Tide hospitality system, belongs to an individual who has operated it for 42 years. The owner has kept her identity private, avoids the press, operates silently, and treats her employees like family. After her husband, the co-founder, passed 5 years ago, she took over completely, opened 2 more locations, increased revenue by 23%, and maintained the highest staff retention rate in the industry. Armand tilted his head, genuinely interested. "Is she present tonight?" "I'd like to meet her." Tony turned, looking straight at me. Every eye in the restaurant followed. He walked to my table, bowed slightly, his voice deep and proud. "The owner of the Clock Tower room and all of Granite and Tide hospitality, Mrs. Eudora Glass." There was no sound, not even a breath. I saw Celine's face turn pale, her mouth rigid. Corin stood frozen, his hand trembling slightly. Armand's eyes lit up, a wordless acknowledgement. Isla smiled very faintly, the smile of someone who understood the whole picture correctly. I slowly stood up, leaving the corner table, the place I had silently occupied for years, and stepped into the light. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was calm, steady, not weak. "I am Eudora Glass, and yes, I am the owner of this restaurant. What would you do next in my position? Forgive or restore order?" Press subscribe to follow the immediate resolution, where a simple sentence, "Please sit, we need to talk about honesty," will change the whole game. Celine was the first to regain her voice. "No way." She took one step back, then two, as if I had just turned into something dangerous. Corin grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. His face was ashen, his throat swallowing hard, but unable to utter a word. Armand de Wolf broke the silence. He stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mrs. Glass, it is an honor to meet you. I am Armand de Wolf. I have been tracking Granite and Tide for a long time. Your operating metrics are truly impressive. I tried to schedule a meeting but was told you were very private." I shook his hand. It was warm and firm. "Thank you, Mr. de Wolf. I believe in letting the work speak for itself." Isla Chen approached, her eyes filled with respect. "Mrs. Glass, Isla Chen, Crestwood Investment Fund. We have tried to reach out for 8 months. Your model of high profits while remaining humane to your staff is rare in the industry. I am very much looking forward to discussing partnership opportunities." I nodded. "I will have my assistant arrange a time, Miss Chen." Meanwhile, Corin and Celine stood like statues. The entire restaurant was silent, watching as if before a stage play. Celine staggered closer, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, Mom, you are the owner of this restaurant?" I looked straight into my daughter-in-law's panicked eyes. "That's right, Celine. My husband, Rupert, and I built Granite and Tide from scratch. The small restaurant you told everyone about, the cute comfort food, is actually 7 restaurants. Last year's revenue, $12 million. The number hung in the air. Armand nodded in confirmation. "I've seen the public reports." "That's a modest claim. Including real estate and assets, Granite and Tide is estimated at $20 million. Celine swayed, and Corin had to support her. "But you live in that old house, drive that old car, wear those clothes." "Cheap clothes?" I continued. "Yes, because I don't need to prove my worth with clothes or cars. We were poor, truly poor. We know the value of a dollar. We live modestly, investing in the business and the future, not in appearances." I turned to Corin. "We thought that lifestyle would teach you about real values." "Perhaps we were wrong." Corin finally managed to whisper. "Mom, why didn't you say anything? Why did you let me think you were poor?" "Because you never asked, Corin. Since your father died, have you ever once asked how I was living? If I had enough money? You only asked when you needed money. You never asked about me." Corin shook his head. "I thought you just had a pension. The house. You thought I was a burden," I stated bluntly. 2 years ago, you and Celine came and told me to look for a nursing home. You said you couldn't carry me. Do you remember?" Corin's face went pale. Armand and Isla subtly exchanged glances, enough to understand what they had just witnessed. I continued, my voice hardening. "You told me to sell the house your parents lived in for 40 years, to pay for a nursing home. And the rest, we are your only family. You were calculating my death, Corin. Calculating how much you could get from the house while I was still alive." Celine raised her voice sharply. "That's not true. We were worried about you. We wanted you to be well cared for." "Worried?" I looked directly at Celine. "You kept Eames away from me for 2 years. I was only allowed to hold my grandson for 15 minutes after birth. You didn't invite me to his birthday. You returned the gifts I knitted. You lied that the restaurants had closed down. Was all that out of concern for me?" Celine's face was fiery red. Maria, the 15-year server, stepped out, her voice shaky but firm. "I've worked here for 15 years. Mrs. Glass is the best owner I've ever known. When my mother had cancer, she gave me 2 months paid leave. When my son needed tuition, she paid me a year's salary in advance so I could send him to school. She treats us like family. Carlos, the sous chef, nodded. My house burned down 3 years ago. Mrs. Glass not only gave me time off, but also paid for a hotel for my whole family for 3 months until we found a new place. Then one person, then another. They recounted acts of kindness that I had forgotten, but they never would. At that moment, Corin realized the people not related by blood were treated more like family than he was. Corin knelt in the middle of the restaurant. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I don't know what kind of person I've become." "Yes, you do." I cut him off, surprisingly cold. "You made choices every day, choosing money over love, appearance over value, contempt over the person who gave birth to you." I looked at Celine. "And you did something worse." I took the file Nico provided. "You used Eames to scam donations, posting photos of him with captions for fundraising for disabled children, charity for orphans. A total of $32,000 in 18 months, but all transferred into personal accounts," Armand straightened. "That is mail fraud, wire fraud, a federal crime." Celine shook her head frantically. "No, I was going to use the money to pay credit card debt, overdue condo rent, buy items to photograph and then return. I know about the $223,000 in debt, the fraudulent loan documents. I know everything." Celine applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing louder. It wasn't applause for a celebration, but for affirmation. A woman finally standing up to defend her dignity. An elderly female customer approached. "I heard it all. You did the right thing. I also have a son who treated me similarly, until I stopped giving and stopped forgiving. You are very brave." I held her hand, nodding my thanks. Armand turned to Corin and Celine. "Our meeting is concluded here. Crestwood and I do not invest in people with ethical issues, especially those who treat family as you have just demonstrated." Isla nodded. "I concur. And I will make sure the investment community is aware of these behaviors." Their restaurant dream, their last chance, had just evaporated before their eyes. Corin stumbled toward me. "Mom, what are you going to do? Are you going to call the police about Celine?" I looked at my 38-year-old son, trembling and pleading. A part of me, the mother part, wanted to hug him. But the rest of me, the part that had suffered too many cuts, knew that forgiveness without consequence is an invitation for more pain. "I won't report it," I said, "but there must be restitution, every penny. $32,000 to legitimate organizations that help children." Within 1 year, Celine let out a breath of relief. "But if the repayment is not made on time, or if there is any recurrence, I will submit all evidence to the FBI. Trust me, charity fraud, especially involving children, has no leniency." Celine nodded rapidly. "Yes, I will repay it." I promise. I turned to Corin. "As for you, I have changed my will." He looked up, horrified. "You will receive the house you waited for me to die to sell, and $10,000 cash. That's it. The rest, 7 restaurants, all real estate, the entire portfolio, goes into a trust, allocated to loyal employees, to charity organizations, and a scholarship fund for Eames when he turns 25. The fund will be managed by an independent administrator. You and Celine will not touch a single dime." Corin choked. "Are you cutting me off from the family?" "No, you cut yourself off a long time ago, Corin. I am merely accepting the reality." I looked at Tony and the staff. "Thank you. Thank you all." Then turned to Armand and Isla. "My apologies for this spectacle." Armand smiled warmly. "No apology necessary." Tonight, I learned more, not just about business, but about strength of character. I very much look forward to working with you. Isla shook my hand. Me too. You are the role model I want my daughters to look up to. I thanked them. I looked at Corin and Celine one last time. If one day you truly change, not for money, not for inheritance, but because you understand what you did wrong, come see me. The door is not locked tightly, but it is no longer wide open as before. I walked out of my restaurant into the cold Providence night. Brenda was waiting, embracing me without a word. I cried on her shoulder, this time tears of liberation. Life never closes neatly like a movie. But that night, on the drive home with Brenda, I found something I had lost long ago: dignity. And that was the beginning of everything. If you were in my position, how far would you open the door for Eames, for the employees, for yourself? In the next part, I will discuss how I rebuilt all relationships after that night and the true cost of freedom. That night I couldn't sleep. In the all-too-familiar bedroom, the bed where Rupert used to lie beside me, the wall still holding our wedding photo from 42 years ago, I stared at the ceiling. Everything was done. The truth was spoken, and justice, in its own way, had been served. Yet my heart still ached. Brenda slept in the living room, not wanting to leave me alone. Through the slightly ajar door, the steady sound of her breathing made me infinitely grateful. At least I had one person. The phone vibrated. 3 a.m. Corin. I didn't answer. The ringing stopped, then started again. 12 missed calls overnight. I didn't listen to any voicemails. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed coffee, and sat by the window watching the sun rise over Federal Hill. Brenda woke up, her hair messy, eyes swollen. "Did you sleep?" "Not much." She sat down, taking my hand. "Do you regret it?" I thought for a long time. "No," I finally said. "I'm hurting, but I don't regret it." Someone had to teach Corin that actions have consequences. If not me, his mother, then who? Brenda nodded. Sometimes, tough love is the only true love. The phone rang again, an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Glass?" "Lyle Voss here. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Lyle. Corin and Celine just contacted my office. They want to meet you, say it's very important." My heart tightened. "I'm not ready." I told them that. "But you should know, they sound genuinely distressed. Especially Corin distressed. My son was distressed. One part of me wanted to rush to his side. The mother part that doesn't die no matter what the child does was twisting. But the other part, the one that had been hurt too much, knew that pain was necessary. Without pain, there is no change. "Tell them I need time," I told Lyle. "Maybe a month. Maybe longer. I will let them know when I am ready." The following days passed strangely. Life went on. I met with Tony and the managers, reviewed reports, but something was different. The staff looked at me with different eyes, not fear or distance, but a deeper respect mixed with admiration. Maria sought me out in the office. "Mrs. Glass, I want to thank you." "Thank me for what, Maria?" "For showing us standing up for yourself isn't selfish." I have an older brother who treats my mother poorly. After that night, I told him straight up that I wouldn't tolerate it anymore. I feel stronger. I hugged Maria. In that embrace, I realized, if my pain helped someone else find strength, then it wasn't in vain. 2 weeks after the restaurant event, an envelope arrived at the office. No sender listed. The handwriting on the letter let me recognize it immediately. Corin. "Dear Mom, I know you don't want to see me, and I deserve that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I am writing to let you know a few things. Celine and I have left the condo. I can no longer afford it, and I don't want to live in that pretense anymore." We rented a small apartment in Pawtucket, 2 bedrooms. Not luxurious, but real. I started a real job, stable salary, not for showing off, but to pay off debt and relearn how to work honestly. Celine is also working part-time and has started therapy. She grew up in a family with twisted values, and she wants to change so Eames doesn't grow up that way. Regarding Eames, I've told him about his grandmother, about you and Grandpa building granite and tide, about humility, kindness, and true value. I don't know how to teach him yet, but I'm trying. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance, when you are ready, to prove I can change, not with words, but with time. I love you, Mom. I just forgot how to show it. Your son, Corin. I read it 3 times. Tears blurred the ink. Brenda sat opposite me. A letter from Corin? Yes. What are you going to do? I folded the letter, putting it in the drawer. I don't know yet, but I'll keep it. Maybe one day I'll reply. 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. I was at the clock tower room reviewing the new seasonal menu when Tony walked in. Mrs. Glass, a visitor wants to meet you. She says it's very important. Who is it? Aurora Hart, Celine's sister. My heart beat faster. Aurora, the girl I only met a few times, always by her sister's side, always with a sarcastic smile. Let her in. Aurora walked in, completely different. A simple shirt, jeans, neatly tied hair, almost no makeup. Mrs. Glass, she said, her voice trembling, I apologize for all the times I laughed at you, looked down on you. I learned from my sister and thought that was right. But after that night, I realized I've been wrong for 29 years. I listened. I grew up in a family that only valued appearance. Nice cars, nice houses, expensive things. No one taught me humility or kindness. When I saw you, a person who actually has everything my family pretends to have, choose to live simply and kindly, I wanted to change, but didn't know where to start. Could you teach me? Not business, but how to be a good person. I looked at the young woman, saw genuine pain, saw resolve. Start here, I said. Stop pretending. Live within your means. Treat everyone with respect, even those you once thought were below you. Remember that a person's worth is not in what they own, but in how they treat others. Aurora nodded, engraving every word. And thank you for coming. You are the first person in the Hart family to truly apologize to me. A month after the fateful night, I received a package. No sender listed, but opening it, I knew immediately. The navy blue wool scarf I had knitted for Eames 2 years ago, the one Celine had put in the charity bag. Along with it, a small note in Celine's handwriting. Mom, I found the scarf again. I was wrong to throw it away. Eames loves it very much. I told him that Grandma knitted it with love. He asked, when do I get to see Grandma? I don't know how to answer yet, but I hope someday. I hugged the photo and cried. No longer just tears of sorrow, but tears of hope. 6 weeks after that night, I made a decision. I called Lyle. Lyle, arrange a meeting. At my house. Not the restaurant. Me with Corin and Celine. With Eames. Are you sure? I am sure. Sunday. I cleaned the house, baked cookies using my mother's recipe, and brewed tea. Brenda asked if I needed her there. I shook my head. I have to do this alone. 3 o'clock. The doorbell rang. Corin stood there, a simple shirt, khaki pants, no expensive suit or gelled hair. He looked more real. Celine was beside him, a modest cotton dress, almost no jewelry. In between them, holding both their hands, Eames, wearing the blue wool scarf. Hello, Mom, Corin said, his voice hoarse. I looked at them for a long time. Then I knelt down to Eames's eye level. Hello, my dear. Do you know who I am? Eames looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. That's Grandma Eleanor. Grandma, Eames repeated, his hand touching the scarf. Did you make this? Yes, I whispered, tears welling up. I made it for you. Because I love you. Thank you, Grandma, my grandson said clearly. Then he asked innocently, Do you have cookies? I smiled through my tears. Yes, just baked. Come inside. That afternoon was not a perfect reconciliation. There was no happily ever after, but it was a start. Corin talked about his job as a mid-level restaurant manager, not glamorous, but honest. Celine talked about therapy, about confronting the wrong values she learned from her family. We have started the restitution, Corin said. The first $3,000, $29,000 left. We will pay it all back, no matter how long it takes. I nodded. I didn't say, no need, or I forgive you. They needed to pay, to learn. And Mom, Celine's voice was shaky, I'm sorry. Not because I'm afraid of the consequences, but because I understand how much I hurt you. I can't erase it, but I can try to be a better person. I looked at my daughter-in-law, seeing true remorse. You've started correctly, I said softly. Eames sat at the dining table, his feet dangling, munching on cookies, smiling innocently, the smile of a child. In that smile, I saw hope. When they left, Corin paused at the door. Mom, can you forgive me? I thought for a long time again. I'm on my way there, I finally said. I can't forgive immediately. The pain is still there. But I am ready to watch you change, ready to give you a chance. Is that enough? Corin nodded, tears falling. More than enough, Mom. More than I deserve. Before leaving, Eames hugged my leg. Grandma, can I come again next week? My heart blossomed. You can come whenever you want, my love. That night, alone in the quiet house, I sat before the wedding photo. Do you see, Rupert? I whispered. Maybe there is still hope. What we taught our son wasn't lost, just buried. Now it's beginning to sprout again. I touched his face. You would be proud of me. I stood up. I'm not weak anymore. My story is not over. Corin and Celine might truly change, or they might relapse. We might rebuild the relationship, or the distance might remain. But I learned the important thing. Love does not mean enduring abuse. Forgiveness does not mean having no boundaries. And sometimes the best way to love is to say, enough is enough. I am Eudora Glass, 66, widowed, the mother of a son who is still learning how to be a better person. I own 7 restaurants, $20 million in assets, but most importantly, I own my dignity. No one, not even my son, can take it away anymore. That is the lesson I learned. And that is what I want to send to anyone listening to this story. You deserve respect, no matter who the person disrespecting you is. Never forget that. If it were you, how far would you open the door? For Eames, for Corin, or just for yourself? In the next part, I will tell you how I set boundaries while still maintaining a familial connection. If Eudora's story touches you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming parts. Hit subscribe and the notification bell, and let me know where you are watching from. Every subscription is a hand of support for stories about dignity, boundaries, and hope.